What if I told you that you're probably paying too much in child support? Welcome to the Stephanie Young Law Podcast, hosted by me, Stephanie Young. In today's episode, we're going to talk about why you're probably paying too much in child support. There's been a lot of changes in the child support legislation lately. It's 2026, and there's some new laws that have come out that you need to hear about and you need to be aware about. I'm a family law litigation attorney here in Covington, Georgia, with a passion for being my client's biggest legal ally. Child support is one of the biggest litigated aspects of family law. I would say right behind the overall branch of divorce. But people often say, why? When there's a calculation, shouldn't it just be pretty straightforward? You plug it in, there's a calculation, and that's the child support. What is there to litigate? That's definitely not the case. There's income arguments. Oh, well, he makes $20,000. No, he does not make $20,000 a year. How did he afford a car and this house and, all these things on $20,000 a year? And so then that's something that we come back and we litigate that and we show the judge, on paper, what you make on paper isn't what we need to be putting into the child support worksheet. We argue, if I represent the other party, that we need to put in there what the actual income is. Other aspects that become litigated is the fact that there's this thing called deviations. So a deviation in a child support worksheet is basically saying, why is the number that the worksheet automatically has generated, why is that number higher or lower than what really should be paid by the non-custodial parent? And that becomes an argument. The other aspect is the fact that a lot of these deviations, and we're going to talk briefly about what some of those trigger deviations are, what would make somebody say, well, I want to pay less or more. It's not just arbitrary, right? Is the fact that some of those deviations are discretionary. Discretionary means that it's up to the judge whether or not they allow it. So let's kind of dive into that, okay? The fact that, let's say that the non-custodial parent. So when I say the non-custodial parent, what I'm talking about is the parent that has, typically we say that means that's the parent that has less time with the child. And there's also situations when there's equal time, and we'll also briefly talk about that. And I actually think that it's my opinion that these child support changes probably affect folks that have that joint parenting time schedule, maybe the week on, week off, or we call it the 2-2-3. So the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to the other parent, and then we alternate weekends. Those schedules, if you've got a schedule like that, you definitely want to continue to listen to this episode, because that's the child support laws have specifically changed with those people in mind. So let's go back to what could trigger those deviations. Let's say that you live 4 states away. So that means every few months, you're having to pay for a plane ticket for your child to come see you and come all the way back, right? That's an additional charge that a normal schedule where you live 5 or 10 or 15 minutes from the other parent doesn't have to incur. You're having to incur that. And the law has realized that and basically said that you can ask for, that is a discretionary deviation for the judge to say, okay, I see that historically you are paying a lot of money in transportation costs, and that's when we argue that should be calculated to make your child support less. So we would call that a downward deviation, when the child support amount is lower than what the presumed amount is going to be. Another type of deviation that we see is if you are paying child support on another child that's not related to this child support worksheet. So if you've got a child from another relationship, whether, a relationship through a divorce, and you are court-ordered, that's the key word there, court-ordered to pay child support on that child. So there's a number that a judge has signed an order to say, you legally are obligated to pay this amount. Then that amount can be included. We impute that into the worksheet for this other child because you just say, well, I've got this other obligation, so I can't really afford both, or, maybe not necessarily can't afford, but you can say, that I want this to be considered, the fact that I have to pay to support this other child. And that is actually, if it's court ordered, that is not discretionary. So what we call that is a mandated deviation. So the judge doesn't have the ability to say, don't include that, you can't include that, like they do with, let's say, a travel deviation. The judge has to, as long as it's court ordered, has to say you get some credit for the fact that you do have this other support obligation to make your child support lower, the downward deviation from what the presumption is of as far as what you should pay. So I know that's a lot of, it's very fact specific if you haven't picked up on that already. It's very situation specific. So that's why it's important that your attorney knows all the different aspects of your life, because it could become very relevant to your child support calculations. Now, part of what we're talking about today is the parenting time deviation. That is the big change in 2026. This started rolling in. I say rolling in terms of it became a discretionary deviation. Remember, we talked about discretionary being something that it's up to the judge whether or not you basically argue, right? It's something that your lawyer absolutely should argue to the court, but it's the ultimate decision on whether or not that is recognized and actually, put into the worksheet on a final basis is up to the court. So that's discretionary. Parenting time deviation, so to say, hey, I get my child quite a bit. So why am I paying $800 a month, let's say, for example, when I'm getting my child basically almost the same as the other parent, maybe just 2, 3, 4 nights less a month? Why all of a sudden does that 4 nights extra, is it costing me $800? Previously, I know it's mind-blowing, previously, the law said, oh, well, you definitely could, it was discretionary. But when again, we go back to say you can argue that to the court, but the courts were not mandated to include that, to say, to care at all. You could not see your child in the old laws. You could never see your child, or you could see your child 45% of the time, with the other parent having 55% of the time. So literally just the difference of a few nights, and your child support would be the same. It's crazy, right? It's frustrating. And that the law had picked up on that. The lawmaker said, okay, we hear you, because I'm sure that push came not only from the non-custodial parents that were paying those amounts, but also from attorneys. Because, in terms of family law litigators, we've seen this. There's a big disparity there, where then you end up arguing and really litigating over those few nights, even if that's not what's best for the child. Let's say that the schedule, 45% with one parent, 55% with the other parent. Let's say that everybody agrees that that's what's best for the child. But then we look at the numbers of child support and we're like, that means all of a sudden the difference of just those couple nights a week or in the whole month could cost you $1,000 extra. And so then parties started to litigate and fight over that parenting time, not because they actually thought that a change in the parenting time was best for the child, but because it was costing them a lot of money not to. And of course, and I'm think most family law attorneys, although, we can talk about and vent a little bit about how the parenting time, having to calculate that down to literally day by day, it is tedious. It's worth it. If we're being good advocates for our clients, it's worth it for them because it has really changed the game. So let's kind of talk about the parenting time, right? And that's what I'm focusing on in today's episode. With the parenting time, what we have seen is a big change that I think the law has been slow to catch up on, but I think it's much needed, more so now than ever before. What we have seen is we've seen a generation in which there's been a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home parent, could be stay-at-home dad, and so there's been that primary parent where we say, okay, at a divorce, let's just say that, for example, when we're calculating child support, we've seen a situation in which it's been pretty, obvious that you've got that every other weekend schedule to one parent, and then the main school time schedule, so the weekdays, with another parent, right? So the child support numbers made sense just using the calculator as it was, without really caring about what the parenting time was. Because there was one parent that would just naturally, and it wasn't that it was an argument, would just naturally not get a lot of parenting time, but the parenting time that they had was meaningful. Just wasn't a lot. So why would we include that? It wasn't relevant. Now we've seen a big change in terms of careers and with the economy. And we don't see parents that are stay-at-home moms as much anymore, or stay-at-home dads, or we see a lot of parents that are becoming equally involved in their children's lives. And this is just generalized. So of course, I'm not saying that that's every single case or everybody's family situation, but it's becoming more and more popular. You're seeing more involved fathers. I say that because, again, that is a generalized statement, but it's typically looked like the mom was the more involved parent, and then the dad was still a parent, but it was just a different role. That's not the case so much anymore. And with that change has become a big change in visitation. And then that has triggered a change in what should have been a long time ago, I would argue, in giving that parenting time credit. So what this looks like is that in 2025, legislatures rolled out, it was good law, so the parenting time deviation became, you need to use this. So as lawyers, your family lawyers, it was a huge talk, I would say the beginning of last year, so the beginning of 2025, in which it's, okay, normally we really haven't done parenting time deviations, not real popular, not very infrequently used, but now we need to start putting these in the worksheets. It's not that it's mandatory for the judge to give you that credit, the downward deviation to say, okay, you should be paying less because you see your child more, but you should still start putting them in here and start making that argument to the judge, because it's discretionary, but pretty soon it's going to be mandated. So what I mean by that is 2026, which we're in that already now, but think back to January of last year, everyone was saying, in the court, in the family law world, and there was talk of, you need to start working on doing this now, because come January of 2026, which is where we're at today, it's going to be mandated. So that's what we started doing. But you know what we started seeing? Judges, because it wasn't mandated yet, judges really still were kind of not paying attention to it. They were saying, well, you can ask for it, and I hear you, I see you, but I'm not giving it to you because I don't have to. Okay. So what, as family law attorney, what I would tell my clients is, let's put this in here, but I want you to see that presumptive amount right there before we consider your parenting time. Be prepared that that's going to be the number. But this is what we're going to argue for. And it was wild, the difference. Wild. I'm not talking about the difference of $50. I'm talking about, and for a lot of parents, it was the difference of thousands of dollars. So now in 2026, we've got where it's become mandated. So that means that if you've got an old child support number, and by old, it could even be from 2025, but again, it would be, maybe you did have parenting time considered. Maybe the judge did use the discretion that the judge has and said, okay, we'll give it to you. So that's why I said you're possibly paying too much in child support. But that was really infrequent. So you would have to, I would have to look at your paperwork and know, and just looking at your child support worksheet, as a family law attorney, I'd be able to look at that and see whether or not that deviation was granted to you or not. If it wasn't, and you are seeing your child, that means you need a parenting time deviation. And whether or not do you think this is fair? I really, as a family law attorney, I've told you what my take on that is in my experience, but obviously I'm also not the one that's paying child support or receiving child support. So I want to hear from you. I want to know, do you think that's fair? Do you think that parenting time should be considered in the child support calculations? I would just ask it down below, comment down below. Let's get into a discussion. Again, because that different viewpoint I think is very relevant to know whether or not you think that that should be included. The biggest thing that we're seeing now, and I go back to, You're probably paying too much in child support. Well, what's the action step from there? Where do we go? If I am, what do I do? Well, you modify. You get an attorney that specializes in family law in your specific area, and you modify the child support. You file a petition in the court in which the respondent lives. So if you're wanting to change child support to make it lower, you're probably the non-custodial parent. You're the parent that's paying child support. You're going to file it in a county in which your custodial parent resides. So that would be the defendant in that case. But if you talk to a family law attorney, if you book a consultation, they'll be able to tell you that the right venue for that, the right county to file. But you should file a modification. Now, a lot of question has been, well, what if the incomes haven't changed at all? What if the mom, the dad, what if both of us, our incomes are pretty much the same? We have the same parenting time. I don't want to change the parenting time. I don't want to touch the parenting time. I like the parenting time. We're all happy. Is that enough? Is this law enough to say, well, now I need to change my child support? The answer is yes, it is. And that's huge. And I know that seems like, how is that huge? It is, because that's been a huge talk on, well, do we need more? Do we need a change in income? Do we need a change in the parenting time? The answer is no. I have sat with the child support members of the Child Support Commission, 15 members that were appointed by the governor to sit down and really look at this child support issues and hear from other counsel, about their just local lawyers, to be able to get input and say, this is what we're on the ground here. So lawmakers, obviously there's that disconnect of they're not in the ground working daily, litigating these issues. Let's hear from them. And I've actually done a couple conversations with folks that are part of that Child Support Commission, and they have given me the check mark to say that you don't need any other changes. The law in itself is enough to trigger that you can modify. So if you're currently paying child support and you haven't had the calculations rerun recently, and by recently, I'm going to go back and remind you, that doesn't mean in the last 5 years. It can be much narrower than that. If you haven't had your child support reassessed in the last year, or even less, could be less, you need to go ahead and set up a consultation. If I'm in your area, then I would really like to do that consultation with you, run through and let you know, okay, this is what you're looking at. Is it worth, because that's another valuable question that you need to ask yourself, is the difference worth litigating? The answer might be no, but that's what the point of the consultation would be. Then go ahead and get that set up. If you've been served with a child support modification petition, because I know some of my listeners are the custodial parent, right? And I'm speaking to you too, because ignorance is not bliss. You do not want to wonder and get slammed with this and not be financially prepared. So if you're also someone that is a custodial parent, obviously you're not going to want to file something. You don't want to change it. You want to be getting the most child support as long as you can, but you should be informed about it, right? If you're concerned about how this new law could affect your monthly budget going forward, again, go ahead and contact my firm and we can get you set up on a consultation where I can run those numbers to see. Just be on the lookout. I'm not going to, obviously you don't want to file something because you don't want it to change, but the non-custodial parent probably is going too soon, and you should financially be prepared of what that looks like. Like it, love it, or hate it, child support just got a lot more litigated. But with the right family law ally on your side, you can maintain your peace while I protect your rights. Remember, peace is priceless and it's attainable. We've got this. It would really mean a lot to me, my family, my kids, if you would like, subscribe, and share with your friends, family members, coworkers, anyone that you think that this content could be relevant. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump on and give a disclosure that watching my videos does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, the information that's contained within the videos is for educational purposes only. Thank you so much for watching.